Russian Travel Guide. A duel with sword in hand. For real. Not for life, but to the death. Every boy has dreamed of this when reading the novels of Dumas or reading about the real duels of centuries gone by. Duels have long since gone out of fashion, and along with them it appears that concepts such as valor and honor. They can only be found now on the pages of novels. He gives nothing away to the famed duelists of the French royal court of the 17th century or representatives of the bold youths of the Guards regiments in Russia in the 19th century. Sergey Mishenev, sportsman, a stuntman, a master and teacher of battle reenactments, a researcher of the history and the techniques employed in the use of blades as weapons. He believes that only when fighting for real, as in a duel, can you become a master and attain the essence of the ancient art of fencing. I'm fencing, let's say, for example. And I know that it could happen in life that I'll be standing there, one-on-one with my opponent, with a sharp weapon in my hand, fighting to the death, knowing that my fencing will never become just a provisional or conditional thing, a game, a sport. It will never be that. So I try and make my fencing applicable if it has to be. Not because I'm planning on fighting in a duel, because in that form, it's at its most authentic, at its most correct, in its original form, its proper form, correct from the point of view of its 5,000-year history. And it's thanks to that that this code of honor appeared, thanks to that potential applicability. The code of honor is very developed and powerful. It bears a great deal of responsibility. It really makes itself apparent at the border between life and death. And if I'm working in martial fencing, if I can kill a person, although I'm not planning on doing that, I'm against that tradition of dueling, but all the same, I'm involved in that code. That's it. Finish him off, finish him off, finish him off like that. The Sergey Mishenev School of the Fencing Arts has existed in St. Petersburg for many years. Men and women, students and businessmen, youngsters and adults well over 30 all try to enroll for lessons with some of the most famous Russian fencers. For the most part, all the same, people come here for the romance. And that's really good, because even, for example, in a knife fight, people aren't going there for the romance, they're going there for some kind of self-defense or something else like that. But they come to me for the romance at the end of the day. Whether they're people who have already established themselves in life, or students who are just starting out, or even children, or people who are quite the opposite, have already made their decisions in life, or former sportsmen or actors, all the same, they come for something that they're missing in their normal life, in the here and now, romance, nobility, certain concepts of old. That's what they're missing, and I try to provide that. They come here for romance, but that's not all they get. As well as getting you in good physical shape, fencing gives you an understanding of tactics and strategy that you can use in a more general sense. Stop, Dmitry, don't stick it into him. Don't stick that rapier into him. You literally just touch him with the point of the blade. It was with good reason that Molière defined fencing as the art of administering blows, not receiving them. And life, it's a game, and fencing is a game. And there you must be able to win, to be able to achieve certain goals. That's to say that you begin to think through your strategy. the way you'll interact, let's say, beforehand. For example, fitness, yes, people pump iron, they wrestle. That's great, of course, but it lacks that element of adventure. It lacks that element of struggle. You need that, of course. There's an element of that in every sport, of course, but here it's very clearly expressed. And when I came here, it gripped me so hard, literally from the very first session. True, as a kid, I played at Musketeers, naturally, and I was Portos. But I couldn't have imagined that as an adult I would come to the gym and be working on this. Sergey asked me back then, "Zhenya, why did you come to fence?" I said that I didn't know. I just came because I came. And Portos said, "You see, I fight because I fight." And of course that means that you're a real Portos. Mishenev's student, Yevgeny Solovyov, nicknamed Portos, is a good example of how fencing can change a person's life. Having sensed that he is in fact a character from a Dumas novel, the powerful strongman Portos, he suddenly discovered that not only his childhood nickname had been returned to him, he had also regained his childlike ability to believe in dreams. Either these dreams really did start to come true of their own accord, or the strategic thinking developed in fencing battle played its part. Soon Portos met and captured his love. An attractive girl, she was his opponent in training bouts at the fencing school, and then she became his wife. And then he exchanged his boring business job for his dreams of film, becoming a director and producer. Now he plans to shoot a fantasy film with Mishenev in the lead role. I found an idea in life, the idea of life, you understand. And Sergey, of course. Sergey was the person who managed to change my life. I don't think that just any old person could do that. That's very unlikely. That's to say that Sergey is a real personality, of course. That had a really strong influence on me. A burning attraction to cold steel weaponry is what distinguishes a real man. Once upon a time, those weapons played a key role in choosing his way in life. Sergey Mishenev doesn't collect weapons so much as types of combat, and first and foremost in his hands he has a court rapier in his hands. It was born in Western Europe in the 18th century. This is a trick of fencing, the epicenter. It's a very light rapier. As a rule, it's a piercing or a piercing and cutting blade. And it has a minimum of protective construction. And in this rapier is embodied the most intense, the most comprehensive fencing technique. The main postulates relating to the fencing are an unnatural, overly attractive martial stance, as it were, too beautiful to be real. This left hand, this position with which your fingers alone allow you to see off your opponent's attack, the classic lunges, it all starts here. It's the arsenal of this weapon. The predecessor of the court rapier is the rapier of the Renaissance era. It was the first move from the sword to the rapier, and that came in the 15th century. It's a lot heavier and longer than the court rapier. It's got a deep guard which entirely protects the hand, and there's a long crosspiece designed to lead the opponent's blade away. Another variation on it is the rapier with a bow guard, which is made out of a system of rings and semicircles. The court rapier only works in a pair with your opponent, with your partner. And here, basically, there's a fairly clear idea. When the opponent moves towards me, in one fencing stance or another, a bit more like this, more exotic than we used to. This is the Renaissance epoch stance. It's different, it's more varied. There can be different stances. Perhaps it's a stance in a higher position, almost with straight legs. It can be the Fabrice stance. He liked to almost curl up into a ball. It could be different variations created simply to surprise the opponent with one movement, with one blow. Your elbow and your supination must hold it in this position. The Sergey Mishenev School of the Fencing Arts isn't just a place where they teach you classic fencing. Here a full new modern field in an ancient art is being developed. Mishenev studies, condenses and adds to the moves of classical fencing. With that movement, it tempts him in more. With that movement. Classical fencing, which I teach, can't be directly reduced to some kind of currently existing style or some old classic style. It's the kind of classic that could have been if the development of fencing hadn't stopped at the turn of the 20th century, and if fencing as a sport hadn't developed. That's how I can imagine it. So it's from this point on that we're called the Sergey Mishenev School of Fencing, and not just say the Studio of European Historic Fencing, or really simply as we were named before, because this is my contribution to the history of fencing. These are my concepts, my wishes, my ideas, my discoveries. I like to live in the present day. I'm entirely happy with the current era. And what's really important is that specifically in the present day I can study and really enjoy any kind of fencing, any historical period. But if I lived in the 16th century, I would only be working on early Renaissance fencing, and that would be it. There would be no classical fencing, the medieval period would already be out of date, the different national types of fencing would also be absent, but today I can take in the whole world. Often a weak and short fighter will throw to the ground and overcome a big, strong and brave fighter, and in so doing, the modest is victorious over the haughty, the unarmed beats the armed, and often he who is on foot beats the man atop a horse. So reads a tract from the 15th century. Fencing has always been more than just an art of battle. Old teachings on the subjects aren't just a collection of moves or tricks aimed at seeing off the attacks of one's opponents. They're full of philosophy, developing in a person a strength of spirit and an ability to resist and see off enemy forces. The master of fencing, Sergey Mishenev, has spent long periods studying books and making numerous discoveries. For example, on my t-shirt I've got a symbol of my school. Here the name is written, the Sergey Mishenev School of the Fencing Arts, and there's this strange four-level pyramid with a sword. Well, everything's clear. With the sword, we can't get by without a sword. We need that object. It's a shining strip. It's obviously a symbol of fencing and all the rest of that. But these 4 steps, they're a discovery, my own personal discovery. A lot of people know this. It's called Plutarch's pyramid. Plutarch wrote about the formation of war, of a warrior, and that meant going through various stages in development. This is the lower stage. This is the stage of strength, and what's more, it's physical strength, brute force. But strongest of all is cunning, and then even stronger than cunning is art. That's the next level that Plutarch writes about, but there's something even stronger than art. It's the very highest level and the very smallest brick. In Latin, it's called virtus. Plutarch himself didn't really understand what the word meant, and he was astonished. It's strange. He wrote in Latin, virtus means 2 concepts at the same time, valor and virtue. But it's actually spirit. We use the same word now, virtual or virtuoso. It's a word that can be applied to fencing. That's the most difficult level to attain for a warrior. Mishenev discovered that Plutarch's pyramid can be applied not only to the different stages in the development of a fighter, but also to different eras in fencing. The Middle Ages were an age of strength. Knights in heavy armor overcame one another in short, honorable battles. The Renaissance was an age of cunning, when fencing masters invented so-called secret blows. The age of art came in the 18th and 19th centuries, when the classical school of fencing was developed. We live in the age of virtus, that's the virtual age, and it's not real fencing, where the goal was to kill or destroy your opponent. Mishenev wants to share such discoveries with those for whom the ringing of blade on blade is not just another sound. For that reason, he writes and illustrates books on the history of fencing, on travels around the world in search of new martial arts, and on tactics and strategy in battle, whilst not forgetting, like the ancient writers, about the philosophical underpinnings of these teachings. When I started fencing, I went to the library in my district and asked for some book or other in order to read about fencing. There was no such book, we didn't find one. I went to the shop. Then I went to the big house of books store. Then I went to the big regional library. Then to the public library, and slowly it became clear to me, this paradoxical understanding of the fact that there hasn't been, in the entire history of publishing in Russian, in the Russian language, a history of fencing. Nothing at all. Absolutely nothing. In all those centuries that people have been writing, yes, there are specialized little books. Kolok's textbook came out in 1948. In 1911, Lyugar's textbook came out, Stage Fencing, where there are a few words on the history, but just saying a few words on the history of it isn't the same as a book on the history of fencing as such. I really lack that book, so sometimes people ask me, why are you writing books? I answer that they're the books that I would have liked to have read in my childhood. The saber is a heavier weapon than a sword. It appeared in the 8th century among the Turkic peoples, then it came to Eastern Europe, and then much later to Western Europe. Mishenev's collection contains several different techniques for handling the saber. The Polish saber is a weapon that's equally as good when on horseback and when fighting on foot. A specific touch is the cross. Done on a straight arm, and the defense is specific in that it's done only with a straight arm. An additional element is a strike with the use of the shoulder. It's done along various planes with the aid of the shoulder. It's a universal technique that allowed for the use of the wrist and the shoulder at the same time in one fencing phrase. You could say that it's a national characteristic. We've managed to learn about the Turkish school of fencing with the Turkish matrak. Surprisingly, it looks like this. Although it's very, very similar to the modern equipment, this actually is a modern version, but it's a precise copy, only it's made out of artificial leather. This equipment was invented in Turkey in the 16th century by Matrakçı Nasuh Efendi, especially so that Turkish soldiers could train with weapons without being afraid of hitting one another. Despite the fact that you really want to hit with this thing really hard, the way we like to, Turkish tradition demands that you pull your blow so that it will definitely be a slicing motion.
Был режущим.
You won't find Sergey Mishenev's profession listed in reference works. Performer of horse and swordsmanship, stunts in theatrical and circus shows, a stuntman and the director of fight scenes in cinema and the theatre, the author and host of television programs, a teacher of classical and stage fencing. He's multifaceted like the art of fencing itself. I myself wasn't around when fencing began in my life. That was because when my mother was pregnant, she wanted to have a boy. And for some reason, she wanted him to drive a car, to ride on horseback, to play the guitar, and to fence. And basically, that all came true. This is what's interesting. When I was born, my mother forgot about those wishes, and she didn't tell me anything about that. She didn't suggest that I get involved in fencing. She didn't say a word about that. But suddenly I myself went off and got involved in it. And that really surprised her. I don't think I've really grown up, and when I grow up I think it will already be too late to change anything. he isn't planning on stopping. Having become a teacher, almost a guru of fencing, Mishenev hasn't lost his genuinely boyish passion for his profession. That makes him forever interesting for his students, both those who come to learn specifically to fence and university students studying to become actors. A teacher of stage fighting with a command of the theory, history, and most importantly, the sword. He manages to inspire a passion and a genuine interest in the art of fencing among his students. In fact, at first glance, it seemed like a little human mountain had come in. When he took off his coat, I saw his muscles, I looked at mine, and I thought, damn, I'd like to be like that. Actually, when we had the first lesson, we were given weapons, and I felt awkward because there was something that wasn't quite right about it. You want to just take it, and then... But there's something wrong. You want to take it like that. Then we were told that the hand should be relaxed. We were told thousands of different stories that the foil should be held like a dove. If you hold it too loosely, the dove will fly away. But if you hold it too tight, then you'll throttle it. It was like this. We were given these unfortunate bits of metal. First off, they seemed incredibly heavy. We've now got used to them, of course, but at first you were thinking, how are we going to move these things about? Have you gone nuts? They're really hard to handle, and you don't know what to do with these things. Sergey Viktorovich showed everything so skillfully, the foil is actually a part of him. But we were just saying, take it away. I'd stand more chance with my fists. We'd been taught stage fighting, but this was a piece of metal. I'll let you into a secret. He only seems to be that severe and quiet. In fact, he's a very sweet guy, and I've never met anyone else like him. Firstly, he gives us studies, so that we develop them. Our exam consisted of these invented studies, and by a study we mean that you had to invent some kind of event, to really get into something, which is to say that it was down to our imagination. Then Sergey Viktorovich gave us a lot of lecture materials because he's a very clever guy. You start to realize that you can't let this guy down, and you really want to try for him. In some way you get inspired by this. I don't know what's going on inside him when he's with us. People who are, you might say, basically idiots, who've never held a foil in their hands. I don't know how he keeps calm in situations like that, when people are almost killing each other in the arena. He's absolutely calm in those situations. I don't know. I'd be in panic. I'd start shouting, saying, break, everyone separate into your corners. I don't know. Maybe it's what you have to aim for. One of the rules in this system of teaching is that you're working for the spectators. Taking an exam or a test every time turns for his students into a full performance on a stage, into a little performance where the sword is often the main means for the expression of emotion. Sergey Mishenev and his main assistant in all his undertakings, Galina Chernova, closely keep an eye on the zeal and fervour with which their students master the art of battle. They understand that fencing may be of use to these future actors not only on the stage. This, after all, is also the art of sticking up for your own interests. Look, you come to some negotiations, and you've got some kind of conflict situation there too. What's a fight? It's our lives, true, they're a little spread out across time. But with fencing, it's some kind of story happening within your life within 5 minutes. You have an opponent who's aggressive, or on the contrary is being defensive, or is waiting for you to start your attack, and then they'll come out to meet you. It's that psychology. It's the same in any negotiations. There are people who start putting pressure on and they retreat. And fencing teaches you, as it were, how you can resist. Fencing is an art of strategy and tactics. It's no accident that it's sometimes called fast chess. But Sergey Mishenev, perhaps the best-known master and researcher of this ancient art, believes that it's more than that. Having fenced for a quarter of a century, he's developed his own teaching system and his own approach. The main idea is to combine stage and classic fencing. A person performing the role of the 16th century duelist Count Debussy or the world champion will be unparalleled in battle. It's long been known that the limits of a person's physical capabilities are reached when they're at a spiritual high. It's everyday magic that lies within each of us. The world-famous Mariinsky Theatre. Sergey Mishenev stages fights here for opera productions. A rehearsal of a battle between Jose and Escamillo over the beauty Carmen is raging. The fight director's task here isn't easy. He has to come up with beautiful movements that will look fairly aggressive and realistic, whilst not preventing the opera singers from performing their vocal parts. Sometimes the fights in film or on stage are very artificial. The directors don't pay much attention to them, forgetting that the fights can say a lot about the characters, sometimes far more than words. Mishenev tries to find this expressive language in the duel. It's always a joy to work with him. It's always very clear, very precise. You know, I've watched fights many times. I've watched stage fights many times where the actors are simply doing movements that they've learned. It looks, well, it doesn't look very good at all. It really looks boring. And immediately the spectator thinks or remembers that this is the theatre, that this isn't real, that they're just pretending up there. That's not the way it should be. There should always be a sense for the spectator that the opera has begun. The curtains are drawn and the spectator forgets that he's in a theatre. It's all for real. I think that if you can manage that, then it really is art. I myself am only just learning to speak in this language. I can think up a really beautiful fight, but I know that it has to convey something. You have to say something with this fight about the mood of the characters, about the situation that has arisen between them and that changes in the process of the battle, about what they're feeling and about what they're conveying. A simple nobleman, a representative of the aristocratic school, or a servant, he could bear within him some folk tradition of street fighting. They're different plasticities. They have different fighting stances, different ways of presenting themselves. If there's a comedy element, the nobleman will be more grotesque, puffing his chest out, his chin up. Basically, in any situation, a nobleman is a nobleman and a servant is a servant. And that might not just be for fencing. It could be expressed in the weapon, in the attitude to the weapon, the way the duel begins, for example. The nobleman, of course, begins with a ritual part. He does the ceremonial salute. He absolutely must do that, no doubt. The servant can quite simply neglect all that. There's an interesting item in Sergey Mishenev's collection of weapons. The Irish common folk used to use it, a blackthorn cane named a bat. In experienced hands, this can also be used for fencing. This is a copy of a historic object. They look roughly like this. There's even a saying that the only thing harder than an Irish skull is an Irish shillelagh. A shillelagh is another name for the bat. The modern shillelagh or bat, it looks a little different. It's specially made for training fights. It's smoother. There are special impressions cut out to go under the fingers so that you get the technique right. And the technique with this cane essentially isn't like fencing. You don't fence with it. You have to hide behind it at the right moment. Just one blow is inflicted on the opponent. It's thought that each blow can be lethal. And if you get it right, I agree with that. So in this way, there are some other techniques, defense, but they're just for backup. In fact, the idea behind this weapon is almost a Renaissance idea. You hide, and then at just the right moment, you inflict one single blow. And this is a completely different cane. It's a city or town cane rather than a rural cane. This cane was described as the weapon of a gentleman. It's undoubtedly the weapon of a gentleman. It appeared in England, and that's where it became very widespread. So the cane is the only weapon that a gentleman could allow himself to use. As soon as revolvers were banned, they were the most accessible temptations for all manner of robbers. Someone without a weapon, but obviously with a wallet, is a victim waiting to happen. But he was without a weapon, but with a cane. And that's when the ideas and concepts of self-defense of Barton Wright appeared. And he created a whole concept and ideology of how a gentleman should deport himself in the street. For example, he shouldn't put his hands into the arms of his raincoat. He should throw it over his shoulders, buttoning it here. The sleeves should be hanging down separately, so that if an enemy attacks, you can immediately cast it off, throw it in the direction of one of the attackers, or wrap it round your hand and beat off knife blows. And basically all fencing with a cane, essentially, it's saber fighting. It's saber technique, but European rather than Polish, naturally. It's European. This technique was perfected for really strong blows, unlike with a saber, where you can strike with one finger and the blow is really strong. With a cane, you need to strike with the blows being much harder. In this cane technique, you have this really strong swing. The cane has to touch the buttocks. That way you'll get a really strong blow which can really knock someone out. Unlike in a fight, a fencing lesson doesn't always look spectacular. It begins with slow movements along the track. Here, the main thing is control over maintenance of the distance. Then there's the opening up of an attack with a switch to an attempt at a defensive move. That's the next phase. Galina Chernova, in the space of a few years, developed from a student into a fencing trainer. Nevertheless, she will always see Sergey Mishenev as a trainer. The process of fencing for me has always been astonishing and amazing, and so has the character of the trainer. I came to the sport from karate. I graduated from the Les Guff Sports Institute. For me, it was very important what kind of methodology in the teaching was used and how good the trainer was. And Sergey turned out to be a very good trainer. Literally, from the first lesson I understood, I decided that, of course, I would train with him. He's a very charismatic person. It's that charisma, it attracts a lot of people. Maybe some people don't really take that into account, but they see him and they understand that they can do the same thing. They also want to do it, and what he invents to develop fencing, it's always something new. He's like a flag or a beacon, I would say. Every knight should have a beautiful damsel for whom he performs glorious feats. Sergey first met Natasha when he was just 8 years old, and to this day there is a romance in their relations. Perhaps it's because in his very nature he's a romantic, or perhaps it's because this damsel doesn't just stand around pining for her knight, dabbing away her tears with a kerchief as in old engravings. This art historian, who specializes in the studies of the East, has many interests of her own. Meeting Natasha was fate. This is what I very precisely remember. It was at the Lensoviet House of Culture, and I had a fencing group there. And a new group comes along. Everyone in the class sat down, and I looked and I saw that this girl was sitting there. She's got dark hair and these crimson plaits here. And I thought crimson plaits look great. That was love at first sight. Natasha also fell in love with me at first glance, and was only thinking about how to conquer me. But she's the one to ask about that. When I saw him the first time, it seemed to me that he was a fairly vulgar person who looked out into the auditorium and he simply said, "Oh look, so many girls." He didn't say that, he didn't tell you about that, but that's the way it was. And back then, I also noticed what an impressive man he was. But basically, back then, I didn't like him. But then it worked out that I started to like him. But there was a whole process involved in that. Something else altogether was how to attract his attention. That was probably the most romantic moment. It was our first individual lesson that we had together. And I showed him my legs. Especially, I went to my mum and said, if you've got the time, because I haven't got any, buy me some of those tight leggings. I know that I've got really beautiful legs. I basically show them very rarely, but at just the right time. And so basically you could say that I caught him with my legs. I'm not sure about the plaits, but I'm certain about the legs. When people ask, why do you love? In general, you can't come up with an answer. But I could say for the crimson plaits. But they're not there anymore. They're long gone. But the love remains. Duels are not a thing of the past. They take place every day and every minute. It's just that they're fought without swords. There's even a code of honor amongst a rare breed, but that only makes them even more precious. And even if a knight's cloak and sword are merely an adopted role, it unavoidably leaves its mark on the character of the actor. Sergey Mishenev is a striking example of this. No doubt a fencer with many years' experience behind him, who's working on this seriously and fencing competitively, perhaps reading books on it. Sooner or later he'll start to apply to himself, or at least this is what I would like to believe. He will try to live up to certain lofty demands and ideals. But again, remembering Fukidida, to be valiant, to be in a state of virtus, the very summit of the pyramid, that means knowing good and evil and not being afraid of death, to know good and evil.